Game development explained. No theory, just what works.
What if, what if the reason your team is just completely burned out right now isn't actually because they have too much work to do,
Right.
but, because they're literally having the exact same conversation like 3 times a week?
Yeah, that's the real killer.
Today, we are looking at this invisible tax that is just quietly destroying your project's timeline. So think about your average Tuesday, right? You sit down, you pull up your calendar, and it is just this solid, impenetrable wall of color.
Oh, yeah. The dreaded wall of blue blocks.
Exactly. You are booked in meetings from 9 to 5. And while you're sitting in those meetings, your application is just aggressively pinging in the background.
Just constant notification.
The little red bubbles are stacking up. You're talking to people constantly. You feel, incredibly busy.
They feel productive.
Right. You feel productive. But then Friday afternoon rolls around. You look back at the actual core project you were supposed to be driving forward, and you realize you haven't moved an inch.
Yeah, it's brutal.
You've been sprinting on a treadmill at like a maximum incline, sweating out your week, but your actual location just hasn't changed. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you're currently nodding along, feeling that specific brand of modern workplace exhaustion, you are exactly who this deep dive is for.
Yeah, I mean, the defining paradox of modern professional life is really that we've never possessed more tools specifically designed for communication.
Oh, totally. Slack, Zoom, Teams, Jira, you name it.
Exactly. We have all these tools, yet actual durable alignment among teams feels way more fragile than it did, say, 20 years ago.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. The sheer volume of motion gives us this highly convincing illusion of progress. But when you look under the hood of most teams operating in, hybrid or remote environments, the engine is just revving in neutral.
Right. They're burning fuel, but the transmission just isn't catching.
Exactly that.
I was trying to visualize this communication cost earlier, and it really feels like a leaky bucket to me.
Oh, I like that. A leaky bucket.
Yeah, like if we rewind to when everyone on a team shared a physical office space.
Right.
Missing some context on a project was just a tiny microscopic drip in that bucket.
Because you could just fix it instantly.
Exactly. It was so easily patched. If you didn't understand why a specific feature was cut, you just glanced over at your coworker's monitor, or, you leaned across the desk, or you grabbed a whiteboard marker in the hallway.
Yeah, 5 minutes later, the drip is patched, you're good to go.
Right. But in hybrid setups, those tiny drips, they turn into an absolute flood.
Right.
Every single missing piece of context suddenly requires like a formal calendar invite.
Or you're waiting for someone to wake up in a completely different time zone.
Yes. Or you're trying to decode like a weirdly passive-aggressive tone in a Slack message. And the bucket is just hemorrhaging water at that point.
Which is really why the framework we're exploring today is just so vital. We're looking at the work of Leszek Lisowski, who is this brilliant production management expert.
Yeah, he spent years untangling these exact dysfunctions.
Right, particularly in the notoriously high-pressure world of game development. But, his insights are totally universal for any team doing complex collaborative work.
Absolutely.
And he coined a term for this specific type of organizational decay, which he calls hybrid drift.
Hybrid drift. Just the name alone sounds...
It sounds ominous.
Yeah, it really does.
And to combat it, he created this minimal, ruthlessly efficient rulebook. So our goal today is to equip you with this operational system so you can, stop patching the bucket with your own sanity and start actually holding water.
Yes, please. But before we can fix the bucket, we really need to know what the water damage actually looks like on the floor, right? Like, how do you know if your team is suffering from hybrid drift rather than just having a normally busy week?
Well, Lisowski defines hybrid drift as this slow, insidious decay where progress is essentially a mirage.
A mirage, wow.
Yeah, and the primary diagnostic criteria, like the hallmark symptom here, is that the exact same topics return week after week, just wearing slightly different disguises.
Oh man, I feel that in my bones.
Right, you think you solved a problem on Tuesday, but then on Thursday, someone brings it up again from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
And the entire debate just restarts from scratch.
It's exhausting.
It is. And he breaks this down to 5 very specific, highly recognizable symptoms.
Okay, let's walk through those because I really want to put a name to the pain here. I imagine the first symptom has something to do with those massive, sprawling chat threads that just seem to swallow people whole.
Oh, absolutely.
Like you wake up, you open your messaging app, and there's a channel with 45 unread messages where half the team has seemingly debated and decided the fate of the entire project while you were sleeping.
Exactly that phenomena. Lasowski identifies symptom number 1 as async threads that never close.
Never close. Right.
Yeah, someone posts a proposal, people start just throwing their opinions into the void. Tangents branch off into other tangents. And because there is no formal mechanism to end the conversation, absolutely nobody summarizes the final consensus.
So the work just happens.
The actual work just sort of begins, yeah.
Yeah.
And it usually begins based on whatever the last person to type happened to say rather than, the most logical argument.
Wow. So the loudest or just the latest voice wins by default?
Pretty much.
That is terrifying from a project management perspective. I mean, you're basically letting exhaustion dictate your product strategy. Whoever stays awake the longest makes the rules.
Yeah, it creates a deeply reactive culture. And symptom number 2 is intimately related to that, but it happens on video calls.
Okay, what is it?
It's the quick call to unblock the team that produces absolutely zero durable output.
Oh, I know this one intimately. Someone in chat says, hey, let's just jump in a room and hash this out.
The famous last words, let's hash it out.
Right. So you get 5 people on a video call. Everyone talks for 20 minutes. You come up with this seemingly brilliant solution. Everyone nods. You all feel this great rush of dopamine because you, quote unquote, solved it.
And then you hang up.
And you hang up. But nobody writes a single word of it down.
Exactly. The dopamine hit is the real danger there. You feel productive because the social friction was resolved in the moment.
Right. Everybody smiled and agreed.
Yeah, but a week later, because nothing was actually codified into the official project tracking software, an engineer hits a snag, asks the exact same question, and the entire 20-minute conversation has to happen again.
It's like Groundhog Day.
It is, which naturally creates symptom number 3, 2 realities.
2 realities, meaning the reality in people's heads versus the reality on paper.
Precisely. Or rather, the reality of human memory versus the documented reality of the ticket system.
Okay.
So you have half the team operating on what they remember from that unrecorded video call. Maybe they remember the vibe, like, oh, Sarah seemed okay with pushing the deadline.
Right.
But the other half of the team, or anyone who missed the call, is operating strictly based on what the official Jira board or Asana ticket says.
Which hasn't been updated.
Exactly. And Lasowski points out a brutal truth about organizational behavior here. When human memory and documented reality collide, the ticket always loses.
Wait, really? The ticket loses?
Almost always.
Yeah.
Because we trust the human connection more than the dusty software ticket that nobody updated.
That makes sense. I'll operate on Sarah's vibe rather than the official deadline because I talked to Sarah.
Right.
But that creates absolute chaos when the work actually has to integrate, doesn't it? Like you have artists building assets for a feature that the engineers already mentally cut 3 days ago based on some hallway conversation.
Oh, the friction that creates is just immense.
Yeah.
And it leads directly to symptom number 4, partial attendance becoming the norm.
Okay, how does that happen?
Well, because people are so overwhelmed by these sprawling chat threads and unrecorded meetings, their calendars just fill up. They simply cannot attend every crucial decision-making meeting, so key stakeholders just start skipping them.
Oh, I can see the domino effect here. If a key stakeholder misses the meeting where a big decision is made, and we already know from symptom 2 that nobody writes the decision down,
Right.
What happens when they finally find out about it? Like 2 weeks later?
Well, they raise their original concerns, of course.
Yeah.
And they force the team to essentially relitigate a case that everyone else thought was closed.
Oh, man.
But, and this is the really insidious part of polite corporate culture teams, rarely call it what it actually is. They don't say, hey, we are wasting time redeciding this because you didn't show up.
No, they'd never say that.
Instead, they use a very specific, very dangerous phrase. They call it getting aligned.
Let's just schedule some time to align on this.
There it is.
That might honestly be the most expensive phrase in modern business. It's a polite cover for profound inefficiency. We use alignment as an excuse to, excuse the fact that our systems are completely broken.
It sounds super collaborative, but it's actually highly destructive to momentum. Which brings us to the final symptom, number 5, meeting inflation.
Meeting inflation.
Yeah, it is a self-sustaining cycle of anxiety. Because alignment is so fragile, and because decisions constantly unravel, teams feel this pervasive sense of uncertainty. And to cure that uncertainty, what do?
They schedule a status meeting.
Exactly. They schedule a meeting.
But adding more meetings just eats up the last remaining scraps of focus time. And if your team has 0 focus time, they can't do the deep, difficult work of actually building the product.
Right.
which means the project falls behind, which increases the uncertainty, which triggers
another meeting.
another meeting. It's an administrative death spiral.
An administrative death spiral is the perfect term for it. But, I want to pause here for a second because this diagnostic phase usually prompts a very specific defensive reaction from leaders.
Oh, I can guess what it is.
Yeah.
Because hearing all this, my immediate instinct is to just blame the technology. To say, well, obviously, remote work is a failed experiment. If we just force everyone back into a physical office 5 days a week, all of this hybrid drift goes away. So, is hybrid work actually the villain here? Or did it just act as a giant, unforgiving magnifying glass for terrible habits we already had?
What's fascinating here is that Lasowski's framework addresses this head-on, and it totally validates your skepticism. Hybrid work did not invent poor communication.
It didn't.
Not at all. It simply made the cost of poor communication impossible to ignore. When everyone was in a physical office, the friction of a bad process was completely masked by the sheer convenience of physical proximity.
I see.
You didn't realize your decision-making framework was entirely broken because you could just shout over a cubicle wall to stop an engineer from building the wrong thing. The proximity was a crutch.
We were literally using human bodies to patch the leaky bucket instead of actually fixing the hole.
Exactly. When you remove that physical proximity, the underlying rot in the operational system is just exposed. And the psychological toll of this exposure is catastrophic across every level of a company.
I can imagine.
Think about the leads and the directors. For them, hybrid drift creates severe, chronic decision fatigue. They're constantly being tagged in disjointed Slack threads, pulled into emergency calls, and asked to arbitrate the same issues repeatedly because nothing ever stays decided.
It's just constant context switching. And what about for the project managers, like the producers?
Oh, for them, it induces absolute schedule panic.
Schedule panic.
Yeah, their entire job is to predict the future and ensure milestones are hit. But they can see the deadlines approaching while the foundational decisions they were trying to build the schedule on just keep shifting like sand. They're trying to build a house on an earthquake.
Which leaves the individual contributors, the people actually writing the code, designing the graphics, writing the copy. I imagine they just feel incredibly fragmented.
Extreme attention fragmentation. The volume of work hasn't decreased, but every single unit of work has become disproportionately expensive to coordinate.
Piece of all your overhead.
Exactly. Their cognitive load is maxed out just trying to play detective. They spend 2 hours a day digging through chat histories and vague tickets just to figure out what was actually decided, leaving them very little creative energy to actually execute the work.
So the pain is acute. Everyone feels it. The leads are exhausted. The managers are panicking. The creators are fragmented. And when an organization is in that much pain, they usually panic and try to implement some massive sweeping change.
Yes.
Which leads us right into the ideological deadlock that Lasowski talks about.
The pendulum swing. Because teams recognize that their current way of communicating is agonizing, they assume the tool itself is the problem.
Right.
This sparks a religious war that paralyzes companies. You see it constantly on professional networking sites. It devolves into two entrenched, warring camps.
Oh, I know these camps. The all meetings are toxic, we are going fully asynchronous, cancel your calendars camp.
Yep. Versus the async text is cold and inefficient. We're a family. We just need to get in a room and talk it out. Camp. It's exhausting. It feels like arguing over whether a hammer or a screwdriver is the ultimate superior tool without actually bothering to look at the shape of the screw we need to drive into the wood.
That is the fundamental flaw in the debate. It focuses entirely on the mechanism rather than the objective. The framework argues that this debate is just useless because production, the actual act of moving complex work from an idea to a finished product, requires two very specific, non-negotiable outcomes, regardless of the tools you use.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first outcome is speed.
Speed. Not necessarily rushing, though, right? But continuous forward momentum, like the ability to take the next step without artificial delays.
Precisely. Speed means the developer doesn't have to sit on their hands for 4 days waiting for the Thursday alignment sync just to get a simple yes or no on a technical constraint. The work must be able to flow.
Makes sense?
And the second required outcome is closure. Closure, which cures the hybrid drift symptom of the returning zombie topics.
Exactly.
Closure is the ability to make a decision, lock it in a vault, and throw away the key so we can stop relitigating it.
Speed and closure. Those are the only metrics that matter. Meetings and asynchronous threads are merely different modes of transportation to reach those two destinations.
So the tool isn't the enemy.
No, the core dysfunction isn't that meetings are inherently evil or that Slack threads are inherently confusing. The dysfunctions is applying these tools to the wrong type of work and failing to capture the outputs when you do use them.
So if we stretch that hammer and screwdriver analogy, if we want to stop arguing about the tools, we have to deeply understand their structural advantages. When does the async hammer actually shine? What shape of screw is it designed for?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, async communication is structurally unparalleled for 3 specific tasks. First, gathering wide input.
Wide input, right?
If you need feedback from 20 different people across 3 different departments, doing that in a live meeting is a logistical nightmare.
Oh, it's impossible.
And it guarantees that only the loudest extroverts will actually speak. Async democratizes that input. Second, it is the best tool for documenting complex, multi-layered reasoning.
Give me an example of that.
Well, if you are proposing a massive shift in your software architecture, people need to read your logic, digest it, reread it, and process it at their own cognitive speed.
Yeah.
You cannot present that verbally and expect deep comprehension.
That's so true. I need to stare at a paragraph for a minute sometimes to really get it. And the third task is obvious, I think. Bridging time zones.
Yes.
If half your team is in Tokyo and half is in London, async isn't a preference, it's a physical necessity. So if async is so powerful for wide input and complex logic, when do we actually need the live meeting? When do we pull out the screwdriver?
Meetings are the vastly superior tool when the work is messy, emotionally charged, highly political, or critically time-sensitive.
Emotionally charged.
Yes. If there is intense interpersonal friction or nuanced trade-offs, trying to resolve that in a text thread is just organizational suicide. Text strips away tone, it strips away empathy, and it strips away body language.
It really does. People always read the worst possible intent into a short text message.
Always.
I've seen it. A live face-to-face conversation, even over video, can cut through that emotional ambiguity in 20 minutes, whereas an async thread might drag out for a week and end in a Cold War.
Exactly. The goal isn't to declare allegiance to Team Sync or Team Async. The goal is to build a consistent team-wide default so we stop wasting our cognitive energy deciding how to communicate every single morning and just start using the right tool for the job automatically.
Which brings us to the operational core of this deep dive. Lasowski's minimal rulebook.
Yes.
It is divided into 2 parts. The first part is entirely about triggering the right kind of work. How do we ensure we pick up the hammer when we need the hammer? And this relies on rule number 1.
Right. Rule number 1, default to async for information and proposals. If your only goal is to share a status update, to present a few options, or to ask the team for general thoughts, you are forbidden from putting a meeting on the calendar. You must use a structured message.
That word structured feels heavy there.
Oh, the word structured carries the entire weight of that rule. Because defaulting to async does not mean dumping a chaotic stream of consciousness into a general chat channel and hoping someone figures it out.
Right. The 2 a.m. brain dump doesn't count.
Exactly. The framework outlines the anatomy of a functional async proposal, and it demands 4 non-negotiable components. If you miss even one, the proposal fails.
Let's break down the anatomy of this perfect proposal. Component 1 is the purpose. You have to clearly state what exact problem we're trying to solve right now, and vitally, why it matters today.
Context is everything.
Right. You can't just say, we need to fix the UI. You have to say, we need to fix the inventory UI because beta testers are dropping the game out of frustration. Give it stakes.
Establishing the stakes prevents the team from just ignoring it. And then component 2 is options. You do not just throw a problem over the fence and ask the team to solve it for you.
That's so annoying when people do that.
It is. You must do the preliminary heavy lifting. You present 2 or 3 viable paths forward, like we could rewrite the code, we could hide the menu entirely, or we could add a tutorial.
But you can't stop there, which is component 3, recommendation. You have to actually take a stance.
Yes.
Of those 3 options, I recommend adding a tutorial, and here is my mathematical or logical defense for why that is the least risky path. It forces the author to think critically before demanding the team's attention. And then component 4.
Component 4.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This one completely blew my mind because it is so simple, yet it fixes the biggest flaw in remote work. Component 4 is the response window.
The response window is the structural genius of Rule 1. You must explicitly state the deadline for when feedback is no longer accepted. I need your input by Thursday at 5:00 p.m.
Why is that artificial boundary so critical?
Because without a ticking clock, an async proposal just hangs in the digital ether indefinitely. It becomes that first symptom of hybrid drift, the endless thread.
Right.
Human nature dictates that if something isn't urgent, we will prioritize the fire right in front of us. People will assume they can read your proposal next week. By applying a response window, you create a forcing function.
It forces them to act.
Exactly. It mandates engagement within a defined time frame. And more importantly, it gives the author the explicit authority to take action once that window closes. If Thursday at 5:00 p.m. arrives and nobody is objected, the author has the green light to proceed. Silence becomes consent rather than a blocker.
Wow. Silence becomes consent. That alone probably speeds up a project by weeks.
Easily.
And there's a vital geographic rule here too, right? You have this beautiful 4-part proposal with a ticking clock. Where do you put it? Lasowski is militant about this. You must put it in a predictable public space. If you start shopping your proposal around in private direct messages, you are effectively destroying the company.
He is highly, highly critical of the DM culture. When you negotiate decisions in private direct messages, you are building a shadow government.
A shadow government.
Yes, you are creating a private decision-making apparatus that the rest of the team cannot see, audit, or understand. It completely fractures the shared reality of the team. If a junior engineer sees a major architectural shift happen, but they can't find the conversation where it was debated because it happened in a private chat between two seniors, trust evaporates.
It's like finding a new law on the books, but there's no public record of Congress ever voting on it. It feels super sketchy.
Exactly.
Okay, so Rule 1 handles the information gathering, the status updates, and the initial proposals. We default to structured async, but obviously we can't build a complex product entirely in silence. We do have to talk. Which brings us to Rule 2. Use a meeting only for one of 3 specific reasons.
This is the filter for your calendar.
Yeah.
If someone sends you an invite and it does not fit one of these 3 criteria, the rulebook empowers you to decline it and request an async proposal instead.
I love that. Empowered to decline.
The first valid reason for a meeting is fast convergence.
Give me a scenario where fast convergence is the only option.
Okay. Imagine you are 3 days away from locking a major software release. Suddenly, QA discovers a massive security vulnerability in a secondary feature. You have multiple stakeholders involved: the lead engineer, the product manager, the legal compliance officer, and the marketing lead who already promised this feature to the public.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
It is. The trade-offs are agonizing, and the deadline is immovable. You cannot afford to write a 4-part proposal, set a 48-hour response window, and wait for marketing to check their email. You need every stakeholder in a digital room looking at each other to negotiate the pain and make a unified call immediately.
You can't async a burning building.
Exactly.
When the timeline collapses, you need verbal speed. That makes total sense. What is the second reason?
Conflict. And I don't just mean technical disagreement. I mean genuine interpersonal or political friction. If an async thread starts to escalate, if the paragraphs are getting longer, if people are highlighting things in bold, if the tone is getting passive-aggressive, you must pull the ripcord and switch to a live meeting.
Because text assumes the worst intent. I've seen 2 engineers get into a 50-message war over an API endpoint in a Slack channel. They were essentially violently agreeing with each other, but because they were just typing, they couldn't hear the nuance in the other person's logic. A 5-minute phone call would have saved them 3 hours of typing and a week of lingering resentment.
Conflict resolution requires bandwidth. It requires hearing a sigh, seeing a facial expression, recognizing hesitation.
Yeah.
You cannot resolve deep conflict efficiently in text. So fast convergence, conflict, and the third reason is complexity.
Complexity, meaning the idea is just too big to fit in a text box.
Essentially, yes. When the work is characterized by extremely high ambiguity, and you know that an async proposal will instantly generate 50 different clarification questions.
Like when you're starting from scratch.
Right. This happens frequently during the very early stages of systems design, or when a team is completely overhauling a pipeline. If presenting the idea async will result in 3 days of people just trying to understand the basic vocabulary of the proposal, a live Q&A presentation will literally save hours of collective frustration.
Fast convergence, conflict, complexity, the 3 Cs.
The 3 Cs.
If it isn't one of those, cancel the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
But, I want to inject some human reality into this, and I want to push back a little on the psychology of why we schedule meetings.
Please do.
Because if I look at my own calendar and I'm brutally honest with myself, a massive percentage of those meetings aren't for convergence, there's no conflict, and the topic isn't that complex, so why did I schedule them? I scheduled them because managing a messy project gives me anxiety, and hearing my team's voices on a Zoom call for an hour just makes me feel less anxious.
The framework explicitly addresses this emotional undercurrent. It acknowledges that teams frequently, almost pathologically, schedule calls for comfort. Yes. The insidious nature of a comfort meeting is that it masquerades as productivity. When you gather 8 people on a call and everyone is talking about the project, sharing their screens and nodding thoughtfully, it feels like work is happening. It feels like you are actively managing the risk of the project.
But we aren't actually deciding anything. We're just collectively soothing our nerves. We're using team time as group therapy.
Exactly. You are purchasing emotional comfort at the exorbitant price of everyone's focus time, and the relief is temporary. The minute you hang up, the underlying ambiguity is still there because you didn't actually produce a decision.
Wow.
Rule 2 is a harsh mirror. It forces teams to confront whether they are meeting to drive an outcome or meeting to manage their own anxiety.
That is a tough pill to swallow, but it is deeply necessary. So part 1 of the rulebook triggers the right work. We know when to type and when to talk. But getting into the right mode is really only half the battle. Lisowski points out something fascinating here. The actual decay, the literal moment the hybrid drift infects the project, isn't during the meeting itself. The drift happens in the silence immediately after the conversation ends. It's the gap between the meeting ending and the next task beginning.
It is the moment of maximum vulnerability for a project. If you do not secure the outcome of an interaction the exact second it concludes, that interaction effectively never happened. The ecosystem will swallow it, which is why part 2 of the rulebook, rules 3, 4, and 5, are entirely, almost obsessively dedicated to enforcing one concept: closure.
Let's lock the vault. Rule number 3. Every meeting must have an explicit output. If you are going to violate someone's focus time, if you're going to take an hour from 6 different people, that hour must yield a tangible artifact that survives long after the video call ends.
And the framework allows for only 3 acceptable artifacts from a production meeting.
Yeah.
Number 1, a decision. You can walk out and say, we analyzed the constraints, we debated the trade-offs, and we have officially chosen path X. The debate is closed.
That's the gold standard. But what if the problem is too complex to solve in 1 hour? Did we just waste the meeting?
Not if you produce the second acceptable artifact, which is a plan.
A plan.
Yes. You might not have the final answer, but the output of the meeting is a rigidly defined sequence of next steps. We don't know the answer yet, but we agree that Dave will run a stress test by Tuesday, Sarah will analyze the budget by Wednesday, and we will review the data on Thursday. The output is the roadmap to the decision.
Got it. And what if the meeting just hits a brick wall? What if 2 departments completely disagree and neither has the authority to overrule the other?
Then the artifact must be an escalation. You do not just shrug and say, let's align on this later. You explicitly document the impasse. We have hit a blocker regarding server costs. Engineering says we need more capacity. Finance says the budget is frozen. We cannot resolve this at our level. We are escalating this specific binary choice to the VP of product, and we need an answer by Friday.
Decision, plan, or escalation. And Lisowski is brutal about the alternative. He says if your meeting ends and you cannot point to one of those 3 explicit outputs, your meeting was just a sync ritual.
A sync ritual is a performance of work. You gathered around the digital campfire, you sang some songs about the project roadmap, you felt a sense of tribal belonging, but you did absolutely zero to move the physical work closer to completion.
Ouch.
Implementing Rule 3 changes the entire psychological posture of a team. If the cultural expectation is that every meeting must produce an artifact, people stop showing up passively waiting to be entertained. They show up prepared to interrogate the problem and force an outcome.
Which flows seamlessly and necessarily into rule number 4. The decision write-up is mandatory, and it must be lightweight. This, to me, is the magic bullet of the entire framework. I've started thinking about this write-up as the receipt for the meeting.
I love the receipt analogy.
Yeah, think about how we operate in the physical world. You would never walk into an electronics store, hand the cashier $2,000 for a new television, and then just stroll out the front door without a receipt. If the security guard stops you, you need proof of the transaction. You need documentation that the reality has changed and you now own that TV.
This is a perfect parallel.
Yet every single day in corporate environments, we take $1,000 worth of our team's collective hourly wages, we spend it on an hour-long meeting, and we walk out of the digital room without a receipt. We have no proof that a decision was purchased. And then we are shocked when someone questions our authority to proceed 3 days later.
The tragic irony of this, as Lisowski points out, is that nobody disagrees with this concept. If you poll any team, 100% of people will agree that decisions should be written down. It's not a controversial philosophical stance.
Right. Everyone agrees it's good.
The failure is entirely mechanical. What actually happens is that a manager runs a heavy, intellectually exhausting hour-long meeting. They finally reach a breakthrough in the last 3 minutes. They are thrilled, but they are also late for their next back-to-back meeting.
Always.
So their brain categorizes the act of writing down the decision as a future task. They tell themselves, I'll type up a nice summary of this when things calm down this afternoon.
But things never calm down. The afternoon is a myth.
Precisely. The core tenet of this rule is, future tasks die. They are swallowed by the inbox, overwritten by the next crisis, or simply forgotten. If the receipt isn't written the exact moment the transaction occurs, it will never be written.
So the solution is to make the receipt so small, so lightweight, that it doesn't feel like a heavy administrative burden. The framework dictates a 6-part write-up that can literally be typed into a project tracker in 120 seconds. Let's break down these 6 parts because skipping even one of them leaves a hole in the bucket.
Okay, part 1 is the decision itself. A single, unambiguous sentence detailing exactly what was chosen. Part 2 is the rationale. A brief note on why this path was chosen over the others.
Super important.
Yes. This is crucial for historical context, so a month from now, when someone asks, why did we do this? The answer is already there.
Part 3 is the one I think is the most easily overlooked, but perhaps the most powerful. Scope and boundaries. You don't just write down what is included in the decision, you must explicitly write down what is excluded.
The boundaries are your firewall against scope creep. If the decision is to build a new login screen, the scope section must explicitly say, this decision excludes adding social media login options for this quarter.
Because if you don't
write down the exclusion, I guarantee you a designer will try to sneak social media buttons into the mock-up next week because we never explicitly said no.
It's defensively securing the perimeter of the decision. Love it. Part 4, the owner. Who is the single human being whose name is attached to driving this outcome? Not a department, not a committee, one name.
Shared ownership is no ownership.
Exactly.
Part 5 is the next step. What is the literal, immediate first action that must be taken to make this decision a reality in the physical world? And finally, part 6 is the date. When was this decided, which gives it a timestamp in the project's history?
Decision, rationale, scope, owner, next step, date. It takes 2 minutes to type. But the compound interest of having those receipts is massive. Think about onboarding a new team member. Usually when someone new joins, they spend their first 3 weeks acting like an archaeologist.
Digging through the ruins.
Digging through old Slack threads and interrupting senior engineers to ask, why is the database structured this way?
It's a massive drain on senior talent to constantly recount verbal history. But with Rule 4, the history is self-evident. The new hire can just read the timeline of receipts. They can independently reconstruct the intellectual journey of the project without tapping anyone on the shoulder. It turns documentation from a chore into a highly leverageable asset.
Okay, I am fully sold on the meeting receipts, but I want to play devil's advocate regarding the async side of the house.
Go for it.
Let's say we are incredibly disciplined about our video calls. We write our receipts, but what about those async proposals from Rule 1? Because the reality I see is that an async thread starts out great, people debate the options, but then people just get busy or they get bored and they stop replying.
It fizzles out.
The thread doesn't officially end, it just sort of fades into a zombie-like limbo. It's not alive, but it's not dead. How do we enforce closure on a chat thread?
This raises an important question, and it's a pervasive cultural pathology. Lisowski identifies the psychological root of it as polite failure. It's the reason Rule 5 exists. Every thread ends in a state.
Let's dissect polite failure. Why do we let ideas become zombies?
Because humans, generally, want to be liked. We hate being the bad guy. Let's say a junior designer posts an async proposal for a massive new feature. The senior leagues read it, and they immediately know it's out of scope, it's technically impossible right now, and it's a terrible idea.
But they don't want to crush the kid's dreams.
Exactly. They don't want to crush the junior designer's spirit. So instead of outright rejecting it, they engage in a polite corporate dance. They reply with things like, wow, really interesting thought exercise, let's keep exploring this space, or great out-of-the-box thinking, let's circle back to this in Q3.
They offer these vague, positive-sounding non-commitments. They think they're being empathetic.
But it is actually profoundly cruel to the project's momentum. By offering false hope, the idea never dies. It stays alive in this zombie state, taking up mental RAM in the designer's head, occasionally popping back up to derail other conversations. Nobody had the courage to just kill it.
Polite failure.
Rule 5 acts as a forcing function against this polite failure. It demands clarity over comfort. Just like a meeting needs an output, an async thread needs a definitive, declarative conclusion.
And the framework provides 4 unambiguous states to apply to a thread, almost like tagging a ticket.
Exactly. State 1, accepted. We are moving forward with this proposal. The debate is over. State 2, rejected. We are not doing this. The rationale is provided, but the matter is permanently closed.
The merciful kill.
Yes, the merciful kill. State 3, deferred. We like this, but we cannot do it now. Crucially, a deferred state must be attached to a condition or a date. Deferred until server migration is complete in November. It cannot just be deferred indefinitely.
Makes sense.
And finally, State 4, swap. This is the language of trade-offs. We accept this new proposal, but to maintain the schedule, we are officially swapping it by rejecting feature Y.
Accepted, rejected, deferred, swap. And the mechanical step here is that whoever owns the thread, usually the author or the producer, must explicitly post that final state as a comment, lock the thread if possible, and copy that state into the central project tracker.
Clarity over comfort. It is the only way to keep the project's mental workspace clean.
So we have the complete rulebook. Default to async for info. Meet only for convergence, conflict, or complexity. Demand explicit outputs. Write the 2-minute receipt. Apply definitive states to threads. Look, as we talk through this, it sounds pristine. It sounds like a beautifully engineered machine.
It does on paper.
Right. But here is the massive, unavoidable problem. We are not machines. We are deeply flawed, forgetful, easily distracted humans. The minute a real-world crisis hits, the servers go down, a client starts screaming, willpower just evaporates. If this system requires monk-like discipline to maintain, it will fail by week 2. How do we stop human nature from ruining the system?
Well, a process that relies entirely on individual willpower is not a process, it's a wish.
A wish, yeah.
Lisowski understands this, which is why Part 5 of the framework introduces reality mechanics. These are structural guardrails designed specifically for imperfect, lazy humans. They embed the rules into the physical environment of the workflow so that doing the right thing becomes the path of least resistance.
Okay, give me the guardrails. Mechanism 1.
Mechanism 1 is the pre-read for decision calls. Let's say you've invoked Rule 2. You have a complex conflict and you need a live meeting. You cannot allow the attendees to walk into that digital room cold. If they walk in blind, you will spend the first 20 minutes, a third of your incredibly expensive meeting, just doing throat clearing.
The throat clearing phase, it's agonizing. It's where everyone sits around trying to reconstruct the history of the problem out loud. Wait, where did we leave this last Tuesday? Remind me what the API constraint was. You are wasting peak cognitive energy just getting people to the starting line.
The pre-read eliminates the throat clearing. But it is vital to understand that a pre-read is not a 10-page manifesto that nobody will actually read.
Because nobody reads those.
Never. It is a single, highly structured message sent 24 hours before the call. It clearly states the specific decision needed, the current options, the unmovable constraints, and what a good enough outcome looks like for this specific hour. It forces everyone to process the context asynchronously. So the very first minute of the live call can be dedicated to actual conflict resolution.
Okay, that gets us into the meeting effectively. But what about the end of the meeting? I mentioned earlier that people usually forget to write the receipt because they are exhausted. How does Mechanism 2 solve that human flaw?
Mechanism 2 circumvents the psychological phenomenon known as the bystander effect. If you wait until the last 2 minutes of a contentious, exhausting meeting and ask the room, so who wants to write out the receipt for this? You will be met with profound, uncomfortable silence.
Oh, the stare down.
Everyone will suddenly find their keyboards fascinating. Everyone assumes someone else will do it, which means nobody does it.
If you assign it vaguely after the fact, you are assigning it to the void.
Precisely. Mechanism 2 dictates that you assign the write-up owner in the calendar invite itself before the meeting ever begins. Right at the top of the agenda says, write-up owner, David.
That is a brilliant behavioral hack because it removes all ambiguity. David clicks accept on the calendar invite, knowing full well he is on the hook for the receipt. It shifts the responsibility from a surprise administrative chore dumped on someone at the last minute to simply being the expected price of admission for that meeting. It removes the resentment.
It creates inescapable accountability. And then we have Mechanism 3, which addresses the physical location of all these artifacts. Mechanism 3 demands one single home for truth. Hybrid drift massively accelerates when your project's decisions are scattered across the digital wind.
If the async proposal was in an email chain, the actual debate happened in a Slack DM, and the final receipt is buried in a Google Doc somewhere. The truth just doesn't exist.
If the truth is fragmented, the team will subconsciously stop trusting all of the systems. They won't know where to look, so they will just ask each other, which restarts the cycle of interruptions. The framework insists you designate one central, undeniable home for proposals and decisions.
Which is usually...
For software teams, this is almost always the project tracker, Jira, Asana, Trello, because that is where the physical work is already being scheduled and evaluated. The guiding principle here is retrieval. If an engineer cannot retrieve the receipt for a decision within 30 seconds, I guarantee you that issue will be redecided next month.
Retrieval is the entire ballgame. If you can't find the receipt, you don't own the TV. So those are the proactive guardrails. But what I appreciate most about Lisowski's approach is that he doesn't pretend this will go perfectly. He actually outlines the most common failure modes and provides the exact troubleshooting steps. Let's rapid fire through a few of these because they are so relatable. First failure mode. We had the call, we did the pre-read, it was a great debate, but the meeting ran long, people had to drop off for their next call, and David never wrote the receipt. What is the fix?
The fix is physical engineering of the meeting schedule. You must stop scheduling 60-minute meetings that run right up to the top of the hour. You schedule a 55-minute meeting. You force the verbal agenda to end at the 50-minute mark, and you use the final 5 minutes as a mandatory silent write-up block. Everyone stays on the video call, but nobody speaks while David types the 2-minute receipt directly into the Jira ticket and shares his screen so everyone can verify it.
That is ruthless. And if someone complains that they have a back-to-back call and have to leave before the 50-minute mark,
then you remind them that back-to-back meetings are a personal scheduling failure, not a valid excuse to bypass the project's documentation process. The receipt must be generated before the room dissolves.
Brutal, but fair. Okay, next failure mode. We tried rule 1. We posted a beautiful 4-part async proposal. But instead of a clean decision, the chat thread mutated into an endless philosophical debate about the nature of our software architecture, and the response window is closing in 2 hours. Fix.
You recognize that the nature of the problem has shifted. It started as an information gathering exercise, but it has revealed deep underlying conflict. You do not extend the async window. You pull the ripcord. The author triggers Rule 2, halts the text debate, and immediately schedules a short, highly targeted convergence call with only the loudest dissenters, using the exact point of friction as the agenda. You escalate from async to sync intentionally, not accidentally.
Okay, here is the failure mode I see most often. The recurring weekly calls, the Monday kickoff, the Friday sync. They start out with good intentions, but over time they mutate into these soul-crushing round-robin status updates where 20 people take turns reading aloud what they did yesterday.
This is a classic symptom of a team operating out of habit rather than intent. The fix is absolute and non-negotiable. Move all status reporting to asynchronous channels. A status update is purely informational. It does not require live human bandwidth. You must make a strict cultural rule that a meeting agenda is functionally illegal unless it explicitly contains a point requiring a decision, a plan, or an escalation. If the agenda is just sharing updates, the meeting must be canceled and moved to text.
The collective sigh of relief from introverts everywhere would be deafening.
Yeah.
Okay, last failure mode, and I really want to press on this one because human nature dictates this will happen constantly. Massive, project-altering decisions are disappearing into the ether because they are happening organically in private direct messages between a lead and a senior engineer. They are chatting about their weekend, the topic pivots to a technical blocker, they solve it in 3 messages, and they move on. Do we have to police DMs? Do we have to punish them, pretend the decision didn't happen, and force them to write a formal proposal just to satisfy the rules?
Absolutely not. The framework is not about enforcing rigid bureaucratic misery. It is about securing practical outcomes. You do not punish organic problem solving. Sometimes a 2-minute DM exchange genuinely clarifies a complex issue faster than anything else. The fix isn't to ban the DM. The fix is enforcing the immediate next action.
A migration of the truth.
Exactly. The very second that private DM conversation concludes, the lead or the engineer has a mandatory obligation to copy the agreed-upon outcome, paste it directly into the public Jira ticket, and tag the relevant stakeholders. You must physically migrate the truth out of the shadow government and back into the public record.
There's a quote from the framework regarding this exact dynamic that I think might be the most profound sentence in the entire deep dive. Missing a call is survivable when the outcome is retrievable.
It is the ultimate cure for FOMO, the fear of missing out, which drives so much of our meeting inflation. Why do people attend meetings they don't need to be in? Because they are terrified that if they aren't in the room, the project will pivot without them, and they won't find out until it's too late. But if you have absolute bedrock trust that any organic DM, any video call, any hallway conversation will always result in a cleanly written receipt pasted into the central tracker, that fear vanishes. You don't have to attend the meeting because you know the outcome will be handed to you. Retrievability grants focus time.
Retrievability grants focus time. I want to frame that. Okay, we have covered the diagnosis, the ideological traps, the rules, and the reality mechanics. But theory is cheap. Let's take this entire machine we've just built and pressure test it against a high-stakes, real-world scenario. Let's see the operational difference this rulebook actually makes when the heat is on.
Lasowski provides a master scenario drawn from the trenches of game development, and it acts as a perfect crucible for this framework. Picture the landscape. The team is 3 weeks away from a major, unmovable development milestone. The pressure is immense. The mathematical reality has set in. They cannot finish everything they promised. They desperately need to cut the scope of the project to ensure stability.
The classic production nightmare.
Precisely. Feature A and Feature B are both only partially completed. The QA testing department is overwhelmed and finding critical, game-breaking bugs. The art department is completely blocked, waiting for engineering dependencies that aren't finished. And the executive producers are demanding a stable, playable build by Friday. It is a powder keg. Everything is on fire.
Let's run a simulation. How does a team without this minimal rulebook handle this exact crisis? Walk me through the disaster.
In a team without these rules, panic dictates the operational process. A stressed producer looks at the burn-down chart, panics, and immediately schedules a massive, hour-long emergency meeting labeled Milestone Crisis Sync. They invite 20 people because they don't know exactly who holds the authority.
They invite everyone just to be safe, destroying 20 hours of collective focus time in one click.
The meeting begins. Because there was no pre-read, they spend the first 30 minutes just arguing about what the actual current status of Feature A and Feature B is. QA says Feature A is broken, engineering says it works on their machine. It's chaos. Because there is no structured agenda, the conversation drifts into tangentially related complaints about the lighting engine.
And the clock is ticking.
Eventually, they hit the 59-minute mark. Everyone is exhausted. The producer says, look, we have to cut something. I think it has to be Feature B. A few exhausted people nod. The call ends abruptly because everyone is late for their next meeting.
And because they don't have Rule 4, nobody writes a receipt. They just leave with a vague, unspoken vibe that Feature B is probably dead. And we know exactly how this movie ends. 2 days later, a UI designer who tuned out halfway through that chaotic meeting posts a message in the main channel. Hey, just checking, is Feature A still in the build? Because Art just sent me the final UI assets for Feature B, and I'm about to integrate them.
And in that exact moment, the fragile, undocumented alignment shatters into a million pieces. The producer's heart sinks. The entire exhausting hour-long debate has to restart from scratch. But now they are 2 days closer to the deadline, and morale is destroyed. That is hybrid drift in its purest, most destructive form.
It's agonizing just hearing it. Okay, let's rewind the tape. Reset the simulation.
Yeah.
Same exact high-pressure scenario. The milestone is looming, QA is screaming, Art is blocked. But this time, the team is strictly running Lasowski's minimal rulebook. What is the first move?
The first move is governed by Rule 1. The producer does not panic schedule a meeting. Instead, they take 20 minutes to write a structured 4-part async proposal and post it in the central project channel.
They cast the net. What does that proposal look like?
Purpose. We must protect the stability of the Friday milestone build. We are currently over capacity. Options. We can cut Feature A, cut Feature B, or attempt to crunch and finish both, which risks the entire build crashing. Recommendation. I strongly recommend cutting Feature B immediately. It has the highest integration risk with the art pipeline and the lowest impact on the core player experience. And finally, the response window. This is critical. I need everyone's read and feedback by 4:00 p.m. today.
It's incredibly clear. The stakes are defined, the path is suggested, and the clock is ticking. What happens next?
Because the stakes are so explicitly high, the team actually engages asynchronously. Engineering replies, arguing they should cut feature A instead because it's more technically complex. Design replies, defending feature A. Significant conflict emerges in the thread.
Which triggers rule 2.
Exactly. The producer recognizes they have hit the conflict and fast convergence criteria. The async tool has reached its limit. So they pull the ripcord. They schedule a short, 25-minute convergence call for the very next morning. Not an hour, 25 minutes.
And because they use reality mechanisms, they set the trap perfectly.
The calendar invite goes out. The agenda is explicit. Final decision on scope cut between feature A and B output will be a written decision. And right at the top of the invite, it says, write-up owner, lead producer.
So everyone walks in knowing exactly what game they're playing. They get on the call.
When the call starts, there is zero throat clearing. Everyone read the proposal yesterday. Everyone knows the stakes. They dive straight into the hard negotiation between engineering and design. Because it's live, they can hear the nuance, they compromise, and they make the painful but necessary call to cut feature B.
And then the vital final step.
Before anyone drops off the video call, the lead producer types the 6-part receipt directly into the main milestone tracking ticket. Decision. Cut feature B rationale. Unacceptable integration risk given QA capacity. Scope. We are removing all related UI and back-end calls for feature B. Feature A remains fully in scope. Owner. Design lead. Next step. Engineering to branch the code. Art to halt asset generation. Date. Today.
And to close the loop entirely, they apply Rule 5. The producer goes back to the original Slack thread where the debate started, drops a link to the Jira receipt, and explicitly marks the thread with the state. Accepted swap. Boom. The vault is locked.
The contrast between the two simulations is staggering. And as the framework emphasizes, the difference isn't that the second team is smarter or more talented. The difference is purely, rigidly operational. The second team utilized a production system that physically prevented the project from backtracking. They forced the work through a one-way valve. Once the decision passed through the valve, it could not slide backwards.
So what does this all mean? Like, if you are a listener sitting there right now, driving your car or walking your dog, and you are nodding your head thinking, my God, my team is drowning. I need this one-way valve installed tomorrow. How do you actually do it? Because we both know human behavior. If you walk into work on Monday morning, send a mass email to your team and say, attention everyone, I am instituting a new 5-rule framework with 3 reality mechanisms to overhaul how we communicate, your team is going to violently revolt. They are going to hear the word process. Their eyes will glaze over. They will picture endless corporate paperwork and bureaucracy, and they will fight you every step of the way. How do we deploy this without sparking a culture war?
You avoid the culture war by being stealthy. You do not announce a revolution. You slowly introduce the medicine. The framework provides a brilliant incremental 3-week adoption plan. You start with the smallest possible change that creates immediate, undeniable physical relief for the team.
Sneaking the medicine in the peanut butter. Walk me through week 1.
In week 1, you don't mention async or proposals. You only implement Rule 2 and Rule 4. You focus entirely on the meetings. You simply start enforcing the rule that every new calendar invite must have a valid reason to exist, the 3 C's, and you start modeling the behavior of writing the 2-minute receipt at the end of every call you run.
You just make their existing meetings more purposeful and documented, which, frankly, everyone will secretly appreciate, even if they grumble about the strict agenda at first. When they realize meetings are ending early because the decision was captured, they will feel the relief. What happens in week 2?
In week 2, once they are accustomed to the meeting receipts and the trust and retrievability is building, you introduce Rule 1. You start requesting that when people have new ideas or want to gather input, they use the 4-part async format, specifically emphasizing the response window. You begin to shape how they prepare information before they ask for a meeting.
And finally, week 3.
Week 3 is when you drop in Rule 5. You start explicitly closing those async threads with clear states: accepted, rejected, deferred. By the 3rd week, they have already experienced the massive relief of having fewer pointless status meetings and actually being able to find documented decisions. So adding the final layer of closure to the chat threads feels like a natural evolution rather than an oppressive new rule.
The psychological advice here is so smart. Pilot this rollout on just one recurring pain point. Don't try to change the entire company's culture at once. Pick that one terrible, bloated weekly sync meeting that everyone universally hates, or that one Slack channel that is always a chaotic war zone, and apply the rules there first. Once the team physically feels their calendar opening up, once they feel their focus time returning, the adoption becomes organic. They will ask to use the system elsewhere.
They have to experience the relief before they will respect the rule.
Exactly. And for those listeners who want to fast track this, Lisowski actually built some incredible practical tools to help. He has a game dev production and design workbook, which you can find at leszeklisowski.com/workbook. It is packed with literal templates, the formats for the proposals, the layouts for the receipts, so you don't even have to think about it. You just copy, paste, and fill in the blanks.
It removes the cognitive load of formatting the documentation, making the path of least resistance even smoother.
And the second tool, which is my absolute favorite piece of this entire ecosystem, is his game dev bingo card, which he posted on LinkedIn. It is a printable bingo card filled with the most agonizing recurring symptoms of hybrid drift. Someone asks a question answered in the pre-read. A decision from last week is undecided. Meeting ends with, let's align later. It's designed as a laugh so you don't cry exercise, but it's actually a genius diagnostic tool. You print it out, put it on your desk, and when you see a symptom happening in real time, you mark it off. It gives you a lightweight, humorous way to point out the dysfunction to your team without sounding like a tyrant.
Humor is very often the most effective diagnostic tool we have for organizational pathology. It diffuses the defensiveness.
It really does. Okay, as we bring this deep dive in for a landing, I want to recap the core thesis. Hybrid drift, that exhausting feeling of running on a treadmill at max speed but going nowhere, happens because constant conversation feels indistinguishable from actual progress. To combat this, you must implement a minimal rulebook that does two things. It triggers the right work by defaulting to async for info and meeting only for conflict, and it ruthlessly enforces closure through explicit outputs, receipts, and thread states.
And you must support those rules by designing for human imperfection, using reality mechanics like pre-reads and assigned writers.
So here is my challenge to you, the listener. Lisowski proposes a 1-week test. I want you to try this starting on Monday morning. For just 5 days, ensure that every single decision-making meeting you're in charge of ends with a 2-minute written receipt attached directly to the main project ticket. Do not change anything else. Just write the receipts for 1 week. Notice how quickly your team stops having the exact same conversation twice. I guarantee you will feel the physical weight of the project get lighter.
It is a microscopic behavioral shift that yields an outsized operational return. But as we close, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought that builds on the underlying mechanics of everything we've discussed today. This entire rule book is ostensibly about efficiency. It's about how structured documentation prevents project drift. But consider the deeper sociological implications of this shift. If you actually succeed in implementing these rules, if you successfully shift your team's default away from unstructured video calls and toward rigorous 4-part async proposals and written receipts, could you fundamentally alter who holds the power within your company?
Oh, that is a fascinating angle. Changing the rules of the game changes who wins.
Think about the current default. In a traditional, meeting-heavy, verbally driven corporate culture, power and influence almost always default to the most charismatic person in the room. The person who can talk the loudest, the person who can think the fastest on their feet, the extrovert who can command the most attention on a Zoom grid. They win the arguments because they dominate the bandwidth. But if you transition to Lisowski's minimal rulebook, you transition away from a culture of who can speak the loudest. You move to a culture of who can write the clearest, most logical, most thoroughly defended async proposal.
You strip away the theatrical performance of the meeting.
Precisely. You might not just be saving your team 20 hours a week. You might be completely rewiring the power dynamics of your organization to favor clarity, logic, and deep analytical thought over sheer charisma and extroversion. The quiet, brilliant engineer who gets talked over in every single meeting suddenly becomes the most influential voice on the team because their written proposals are mathematically unassailable. I want you to look at your team tomorrow and ask yourself, who might suddenly find their voice? Who might suddenly shine if we change the currency of influence from speaking to writing?
Wow. You aren't just changing the process, you are changing the currency of influence. Clarity becomes the new charisma. I love that so much. And it brings us right back to the leaky bucket. If your project is hemorrhaging time, context, and sanity across time zones, you don't fix it by arguing on LinkedIn about whether async or sync is the superior tool. You fix it by mandating that everyone walks out of the store with a receipt. Stop letting the water drip. Start writing down the decisions and lock the vault. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning your defaults, protect your focus time at all costs, and we will see you on the next one.
If this is useful, subscribe.
New breakdowns every week.